Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung didn't just write those words for philosophers to chew on. He meant them as a warning, a precise, chilling warning about how most of us move through the world, sleepwalking, influenced by forces we don't see, in places we don't question. Now, let me ask you something. What if the greatest threat to your mind isn't a person, an event, or a thought, but a place, a location, a room, a social space, even a digital one, that shapes your thinking without you ever realizing it? That might sound abstract, but psychology says otherwise. Your environment literally wires your brain. It shapes your identity, your emotional regulation, even your sense of who you are. And here's the scary part. Some of these places seem completely normal, familiar, harmless, even comforting, but stay in them long enough, and they will fracture your mental strength, erode your emotional clarity, and rewrite your beliefs until you can't tell if they're yours anymore. Over the next few minutes, we're going to walk through 7 of the most psychologically dangerous places Carl Jung and modern science say we must avoid to stay mentally strong. Each one acts like a silent parasite on your mind, and some of them, they're not outside of you. They're rooms you built inside your own psyche. From social media's algorithmic echo chambers, to the quiet wounds of a home where nothing was ever said, to the seductive trap of your own carefully curated mask, we're exposing them all. And we won't just talk theory. You'll see the science, brain scans, cortisol levels, childhood trauma studies, digital behavior experiments, all pointing to one truth. Where you spend your time, physically, emotionally, digitally, is shaping you, for better or for worse. Carl Jung believed individuation, the journey to becoming who you truly are, requires breaking from inherited roles, masks, and false environments. But how can you ever become your authentic self if the spaces you inhabit keep reprogramming you into someone else? This video isn't about places in the geographic sense. It's about psychological territories, invisible rooms that can either expand your awareness or trap you in a version of yourself that's not even real. So take a breath, because once we open the first door, the echo chamber, you might begin to recognize just how much power your surroundings have had over your mind, and more importantly, how to break free. Ready? The echo chamber. Imagine you're in a room where everyone agrees with you. No questions, no pushback, just nodding heads and identical opinions. Sounds comfortable, right? Now ask yourself, is that comfort building your strength or weakening your mind? In 1951, psychologist Solomon Asch conducted one of the most famous experiments in social psychology. He showed people a simple task, matching the length of lines. The correct answer was obvious. Yet when Confederates in the room deliberately gave the wrong answer, 75% of the participants eventually conformed, even though they knew it was wrong. Why? To fit in, to avoid the discomfort of standing alone. Asch put it simply, that which we call reality is colored by the juggernaut of group opinion. Fast forward to today, the lines we match aren't on paper anymore, they're on screens. Your social media feed is a digital echo chamber engineered to surround you with sameness. Algorithms filter what you see to keep you engaged, but what they're really doing is boxing your mind into a tiny corner. A 2024 study replicated Asch's results, this time using TikTok's For You page. People were shown misleading content over and over, and within just 10 minutes, most began to adopt those views as factual. That's not coincidence, it's neurological conditioning. Every time your brain receives agreement, it gets a dopamine hit. That feels good, so you chase it again. Over time, this rewires your neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to adapt and grow into something rigid. The more you're rewarded for being agreed with, the less likely you are to challenge, explore, or evolve. Carl Jung warned about this trap long before Instagram. He saw it in mass movements, political cults, and even religious dogma. He called it the collective delusion of opinion, a force that strips away individuality in favor of safety. If you've ever wondered why it feels hard to think clearly, form your own values, or break from group norms, it's because your mental environment might not be designed for independence. Author Eli Pariser wrote a book called The Filter Bubble, which explains how these systems don't just reflect our views, they shape them. When you're only exposed to opinions that mirror your own, your critical thinking begins to erode. You become psychologically dependent on validation rather than truth. To build mental strength, you have to leave the echo chamber. That means seeking discomfort, entering spaces where people challenge you, respectfully disagree, and stretch your perspective. Ask yourself, When was the last time you were wrong and glad someone showed you? If you can't remember, you might already be trapped. And if you stay too long, that echo becomes your identity. Let's move forward to the next dangerous place. Because once the echo chamber conditions you, the comparison arena crushes you. The comparison arena. There's a quiet war happening inside your head. Every time you scroll, walk into a room, or hear someone's success story. It's the war of comparison. And unlike most battles, this one rarely ends with a win. Social psychologist Leon Festinger said it best. People most strenuously seek to evaluate their performance by comparing themselves to others. He believed our sense of self doesn't form in isolation. It grows, or collapses, based on how we measure up to those around us. But what happens when every image, post, and conversation turns into a scoreboard? Studies in evolutionary psychology show that social comparison was once useful for survival. You needed to know where you stood in a tribe. But in today's world, this instinct has been hijacked, especially online. In a 2015 experiment by Farduli and Vartanian, participants who spent just 20 minutes browsing Instagram showed significantly higher levels of body dissatisfaction and lowered self-esteem. It didn't matter how intelligent, successful, or grounded they were. Exposure to curated lives created immediate psychological damage. Here's why. Social media doesn't show reality. It shows strategy, highlight reels, edited wins. And when your brain sees these idealized lives, it reacts emotionally before you can reason with it. That's the arena, a psychological space where your worth is pitted against illusions. Carl Jung warned of this trap long before the selfie. He believed the ego constantly seeks external mirrors to validate its image. But every time we compare, we risk replacing our authentic growth with borrowed standards. We lose track of our own values. That's what philosopher Alain de Botton explores in his book Status Anxiety. He explains how modern society replaces meaning with ranking. You stop asking, "Am I fulfilled?" and start asking, "Am I ahead?" It's a dangerous shift. Psychologically, this leads to comparison anxiety, emotional fatigue, and even symptoms of depression. When you're constantly measuring yourself against others, your identity becomes reactive, not rooted. And here's something deeper. Upward comparisons, looking at those better off, trigger feelings of failure. But downward comparisons, looking at those worse off, don't build real confidence either. They just feed superiority, not self-worth. Jung's solution: withdraw from the arena. Start measuring who you are against who you were yesterday, not against someone's filtered today. So next time you're tempted to compare, pause. That arena isn't a place for growth. It's a trap that robs you of clarity, peace, and purpose. And once you're trapped there long enough, you'll do anything to keep up, including hiding behind a mask. The mask circle. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much, but from pretending too much. You've probably felt it. That moment after a gathering, a meeting, or even a phone call where you suddenly feel drained, not physically, but emotionally. That's the weight of the mask. Carl Jung called this mask the persona, a social identity we put on to function in the world. It's not inherently wrong. In fact, we all need a persona to navigate society. But the danger begins when the mask becomes more real than the person behind it. Psychologist Mark Snyder developed something called the self-monitoring scale. It measures how much a person adapts their behavior to fit in. High self-monitors are social chameleons. They change their tone, style, even values based on who's in the room. And while that might sound like charm, research reveals a dark price. In one experiment, participants with high self-monitoring tendencies were asked to engage in a group task that required constant image management. After just 30 minutes, their cortisol levels, your body's stress hormone, spiked by 40%. Why? Because the mind was working overtime to maintain a false self. This is the masked circle, a psychological environment where everyone's pretending and no one feels truly seen. It's common in workplaces, family dynamics, even among friends. And it's dangerous because it rewards inauthenticity while punishing truth. Jung warned us that the longer we wear the mask, the harder it becomes to remove. Eventually, we forget who we were without it. And when that happens, emotional burnout follows. You start to feel hollow, disconnected, even anxious in silence, because silence threatens to unmask you. R.D. Laing, in his haunting book Self and Others, explored the fragmentation of identity in such environments. He described how people split themselves, one part performing, the other watching helplessly behind the curtain. That split, it's a psychological fracture, and it doesn't heal on its own. This isn't just theory, it's neuroscience. Prolonged inauthenticity weakens parts of the brain associated with self-regulation and increases the risk of anxiety disorders. You become so focused on external approval, your internal compass stops working. Mental strength begins where performance ends. If you're constantly in spaces where honesty feels unsafe and image feels mandatory, it's not your fault you're tired, it's the mask. So ask yourself, are you in a room or on a stage? Because once your life becomes a performance, your sense of self quietly exits. And if that mask becomes your normal, the next space you end up in might be the quietest and most damaging of all. The silent home. Not every wound comes from what was done to us. Some of the deepest ones come from what was never said, never acknowledged, never comforted. That's the reality of the silent home, a place where the absence of emotional connection becomes its own kind of trauma. Carl Jung believed that what we do not bring to consciousness appears later as fate, but many people who grew up in emotionally muted environments don't realize they're still trapped inside that silence. Because when you live in a home where emotions are unwelcome, you learn not to feel them. Or worse, you learn to fear them. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, often referred to as the ACE study, conducted by Dr. Vincent Felitti in 1998, revealed something stunning. Children who experienced emotional neglect were significantly more likely to struggle with depression, addiction, and even attempt suicide as adults. One silent childhood can echo through every adult decision. This is developmental psychology at its core. A child's brain develops in response to relationships. If affection, affirmation, or safety are missing, the brain compensates by shutting down emotional expression. That coping mechanism becomes chronic suppression. Gabor Mate calls this adaptation gone wrong, a survival tactic that becomes self-sabotage. And Sheila Redman's powerful book, Silenced Families, Emerging Selves, paints a vivid picture of adults who live entire lives disconnected from their true emotional world, all because they were trained not to feel. In these homes, no one yells. There may be no visible conflict, but the silence is heavy. You walk on eggshells, not because of what is said, but because of everything that's not. You start to believe that your emotions are the problem, that needing connection is weakness, and this belief becomes a script you unconsciously follow in every future relationship. The neuroscience backs this up. Long-term emotional suppression is linked to overactivation of the amygdala, the brain's fear center, and underdevelopment of the prefrontal cortex, which handles emotional regulation. In other words, the more you silence yourself, the more your brain interprets emotion as danger. Jung warned that the things we repress don't disappear. They become shadows, and if you were raised in a silent home, that shadow isn't just emotional, it's environmental. You learn to survive by not taking up space, by becoming small. But here's the truth. Silence isn't peace when it costs your voice, and homes aren't safe just because they're quiet. Mental strength doesn't come from pretending you don't need connection. It comes from learning to create the emotional safety you never had. And if silence taught you to hide, the next space we enter might do the opposite. It overwhelms you until your thoughts aren't even your own. The chaotic space. Sometimes the most dangerous space isn't empty or silent. It's full, too full, full of noise, clutter, alerts, screens, conversations, and unfinished tasks. This is the chaotic space. A space that constantly pulls your attention in 100 directions and quietly dismantles your ability to think clearly. Psychology tells us that attention is a limited resource. Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize-winning behavioral scientist, described attention like a spotlight. You only have so much of it at any given time, and when that spotlight keeps shifting because of disorganization, chaos, or noise, your brain burns out faster. This isn't just theory. Neuroscience confirms it. When your surroundings are messy or loud, your brain's default mode network, DMN, kicks in. That's the system responsible for internal dialogue, self-reflection, and memory. But in cluttered environments, DMN activity spikes uncontrollably, leading to overstimulation, mental fatigue, and even rumination loops. In short, you can't think deeply or feel peace if your environment is constantly shouting at your nervous system. A study published in the Journal of Neuroscience showed that participants in chaotic or cluttered spaces had reduced working memory performance and higher cortisol levels. Even more shocking, open office plans, once considered efficient, were found to lower executive functioning by up to 15% because of unpredictable distractions. Carl Jung may not have had access to fMRI scans, but he deeply understood this truth. He often warned about the psychological consequences of disconnection from stillness. In his view, chaotic spaces disrupt individuation, the process of becoming fully yourself, because they drown out the inner voice you need to hear. In the book Stolen Focus, Johann Hari explains how modern life is designed to fragment attention. From constant notifications to visual clutter, the average person today shifts their focus more than 300 times per day. That's not just inefficient, it's psychologically destructive. And yet we normalize it. We tell ourselves, I'm just busy, or I work better under pressure. But chaos doesn't build strength. It erodes the mental clarity you need to choose, reflect, and create. Ask yourself, is your room helping you focus or feeding your anxiety? Is your phone a tool or a leash? If you live in constant motion, your mind forgets how to be still. And in that overstimulated state, even simple decisions become overwhelming. You become reactive, not reflective. Controlled, not in control. To rebuild mental strength, you need a space that honors stillness, a place where your mind can catch up with your life. Because in chaos, you don't just lose time, you lose yourself. And once you're lost in the external noise, you begin ignoring something even more dangerous, your own internal voice. That leads us straight into the next place, the abandoned self. The abandoned self. There's a kind of loneliness that no amount of company can fix. It's not about who's around you, it's about who's missing inside you. That absence is the self you left behind. Carl Jung believed that self-betrayal is one of the most dangerous forms of psychological harm. It happens subtly, not all at once. You stop expressing your real thoughts to avoid conflict. You say yes when your gut screams no. You ignore your own values to meet someone else's expectations. Little by little, you abandon the most essential relationship in your life, the one with yourself. Viktor Frankl, the father of logotherapy, once wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." But too often, instead of changing from a place of truth, we shift from fear. We suppress our needs. We adapt too far, until who we are is only a faint memory. This is what physician and trauma expert Gabor Mate calls the cost of survival. In his groundbreaking book, When the Body Says No, he outlines how chronic self-abandonment, especially among those raised in emotionally unsafe environments, leads to serious physical illness, autoimmune conditions, inflammation, fatigue, all linked to psychological suppression. And it's not just theory. Psychophysiology research shows that people who habitually betray their emotions exhibit elevated levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines, markers directly tied to long-term disease. In other words, your body keeps the score when your soul keeps quiet. Jung warned that what you ignore within will rise against you from the outside. The abandoned self becomes the shadow, resentful, repressed, and eventually destructive. That's why you might feel exhausted even when you rest, or anxious for no apparent reason. The abandoned self is knocking. So how do you know if you've left yourself behind? You stop recognizing your voice. You second-guess your instincts. You make decisions that feel hollow. You perform a version of you that pleases others but leaves you empty. Mental strength doesn't come from pretending everything is fine. It comes from facing the moment you stop choosing yourself and deciding to return. Frankl, Mate, and Jung all point to the same truth. Healing begins the moment you reconnect with the self you silenced. So ask yourself now, what part of me did I leave behind to be accepted? And what would it mean to bring that part back? Because if you don't, you may end up locking it away in the most dangerous room of all. The forbidden room. We all have it, that one place in the mind we never want to go. A memory, a feeling, a part of ourselves we were told was too dark, too much, too broken to be seen. Carl Jung called this place the shadow, and his warning was clear. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The forbidden room isn't somewhere out there, it's inside you, and most people spend their whole lives avoiding it. But here's the paradox. The longer you avoid it, the more power it has over you. This isn't metaphor, it's neuroscience. When people are exposed to repressed emotions, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, flares up. But here's what's even more fascinating. Studies in clinical neuroscience show that when trauma is processed through exposure-based therapy, the amygdala's reactivity can drop by over 20%. In other words, what you face, you shrink. What you avoid, you feed. That's why therapist Pete Walker, in his powerful book Complex PTSD, From Surviving to Thriving, describes how survivors of emotional trauma often develop emotional flashbacks. These aren't memories, they're states. Suddenly you feel shame, panic, or despair with no clear cause. That's the forbidden room leaking into your present. You don't have to have a dramatic backstory for this to apply. The forbidden room can be made of small, quiet wounds, a parent's disapproval, a betrayal, a childhood belief that love had to be earned. Over time, these experiences get locked away, not because they're gone, but because they're too painful to feel. But Jung believed that the journey to wholeness, what he called individuation, requires going into that room, not to stay there, but to reclaim what's yours. Your voice, your emotions, your needs. This is the hardest kind of strength. Not the strength to endure pain, but the strength to face it, to walk into the forbidden room, sit with what's there and say, I see you, and I'm not leaving myself behind this time. People think mental strength means always being positive, but real strength is the ability to sit with truth no matter how uncomfortable. So here's the real question. What part of yourself have you locked away? Because until you open that room, it's not just a part of you that stays trapped, it's your future, but there's more. Because even after we begin to face what's inside, we still have to understand how the energy of the spaces around us shapes everything, from stress to clarity to leadership. Resonance versus dissonance, the energy signature of spaces. Have you ever walked into a room and instantly felt drained without anyone saying a word, or entered another space and suddenly felt calm, focused, even inspired? That isn't magic. That's resonance, and understanding the energy signature of spaces may be one of the most overlooked keys to mental strength. Carl Jung often described certain environments as soul-constricting or psyche-expanding. He believed that some places, physical or relational, have an energetic blueprint that either strengthens or distorts the self. But today, science is catching up to what ancient wisdom and Jungian insight already knew. Richard Boyatzis and Annie McKee, researchers in organizational psychology, studied the effects of resonant versus dissonant environments. Using heart rate variability, HRV, as a marker, they discovered that leaders who created emotionally supportive and aligned environments, resonant spaces, improved their team's HRV coherence. What does that mean? Simply put, people's hearts and brains functioned better together. They were calmer, clearer, and more resilient. That's not just leadership science, it's personal psychology. The people and spaces around you either synchronize with your nervous system or disrupt it. Every environment you enter either lifts your frequency or fractures it. In their book, Resonant Leadership, Boyatzis and McKee explain how emotional environments influence not just mood, but cognition and long-term behavior. If you're in a space where judgment, chaos, or criticism dominate, your body stays in defense mode. Your mind narrows. But in a space of safety and empathy, your brain opens up, you problem solve better, you feel seen, you grow. Even ancient philosophies like those of Confucius and Laozi emphasize the harmony of environments. Confucius believed that the rectification of the heart began with the right atmosphere, what he called cultivated surroundings. Jung warned us that individuation, the path to becoming your full self, requires choosing environments that support psychological unfolding. A space doesn't need to be abusive to be harmful. It only needs to keep you small, stressed, or silenced. So here's a question to ask yourself. What spaces leave you feeling more you, and which ones leave you performing, shrinking, or spiraling? That gut feeling you get, that's not just emotional, it's neurological. Your HRV, your cortisol, your neural pathways, they all respond to the energy around you, whether you're conscious of it or not. So if you're serious about building mental strength, start by noticing how different rooms make your body feel. Your heart may be telling you the truth your mind hasn't admitted yet. And once you become aware of this energetic pull, you'll also need to watch out for the most seductive trap of all, spaces that don't just influence your mind, but train your chemistry. The neurochemical trap. Not all prisons have bars. Some are made of routine, repetition, a chair you sit in every day, a website you check every hour, a conversation you keep having even though it leaves you empty. These are the neurochemical traps, spaces that train your brain to feel normal in dysfunction. Here's what most people don't realize. Your environment doesn't just shape your thoughts, it shapes your chemistry. In the brain, the striatum is the region responsible for habit formation. It's triggered by cues, a place, a time of day, even a certain lighting. Once that cue hits, your brain floods with dopamine, whether the behavior that follows is good for you or not. Carl Jung believed fate wasn't something imposed. It was something repeated unconsciously. He saw that people recreated the same emotional patterns, not because they wanted to, but because it felt familiar. Familiarity isn't safety. It's just a shortcut the brain uses to conserve energy. Modern neuroscience backs this up. In The Upward Spiral by Alex Korb, researchers explain how even minor environmental cues can trigger massive changes in mood. Sitting on the same couch where you used to overthink or doom scroll can reignite anxiety, even if your life has moved on. And it gets worse in overstimulated spaces. EEG data from studies on open-plan offices and digital environments shows that constant noise and visual clutter reduce executive function scores by as much as 15%. That means your ability to make decisions, regulate emotion, and stay focused drops just because of where you are. This is what behavioral psychology calls cue-dependent behavior. You aren't making choices, you're running scripts. Scripts that feel automatic, but were written by repetition, stress, and often trauma. Even philosopher Baruch Spinoza noted centuries ago, desire is the very essence of man. But when that desire is hijacked by the wrong environment, you become loyal to what hurts you, simply because it rewards you chemically. So here's a hard truth. The places you return to out of comfort may be reinforcing cycles you're trying to break. And until you disrupt the loop by changing your setting, your routine, or your response, you'll stay stuck. The neurochemical trap doesn't feel like a trap. That's what makes it so dangerous. It feels like your life, your normal, your way. But it's not. To reclaim your mental strength, you need more than willpower. You need new cues, new spaces, new rituals that support a different chemistry. A chemistry of clarity, not compulsion. And that brings us to something powerful. Now that you've seen how these places shape your mind, how do you start changing them? Cartography of escape, practical mapping. Once you know the places that weaken you, the next step is clear, but not always easy. You have to leave them. But leaving isn't always physical. Sometimes it means psychologically withdrawing from roles, routines, or identities you never consciously chose. And to do that, you need a map. Carl Jung taught that the journey to wholeness requires awareness of where you are before you can move toward who you truly are. That starts with a radical kind of honesty, auditing your spaces. Try this. For 1 week, rate every space you spend time in, from your bedroom to your workplace to your social media feeds, on a simple scale from -3 to +3. -3 drains you, +3 energizes you. Write it down. This isn't about logic, it's about energy. Your body always knows before your mind catches up. Step 2, run what I call a micro-exit. Remove yourself from any draining space for just 15 minutes a day. Go outside, sit in silence, power off your screen. Observe what happens when your nervous system isn't being constantly pinged. You might feel restless at first. That's normal. It's withdrawal from overstimulation, not boredom. And finally, create what psychologists call anchor zones. These are low-stimulation environments designed for recalibration, simple, calming spaces where your brain can rest and rewire. According to a 2025 study on mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, in nursing students, participants who created and used these personal zones saw a 31% drop in burnout after just 8 weeks. This isn't self-care fluff, it's neuroarchitecture. Your brain is a predictive organ. It functions best when it knows where it can be safe. An anchor zone becomes a signal to your brain. Here, we regulate. Here, we repair. Rick Hanson, author of Hardwiring Happiness, explains that positive states become lasting traits only when repeated in the right environment. You don't just become calm, you practice calm in a space that supports it. That's how new neural pathways form. Jung didn't leave us with a checklist. He left us with a principle. Transformation requires container. If your environment is chaos, your growth will be fragmented. But if your environment is intentional, even in just one small corner of your day, you begin to reshape your psyche. So ask yourself, what's one space you can exit today? What's one space you can create? Because mapping your escape isn't about running from the world. It's about finally walking toward yourself. And once you do that, everything begins to change. The integrative close. Let's step back for a moment. You've just explored 7 spaces, not just physical but psychological, that Carl Jung and modern science say can quietly dismantle your mental strength. The echo chamber, the comparison arena, the masked circle, the silent home, the chaotic space, the abandoned self, and the forbidden room. They don't all shout. Some whisper, some seem helpful, some even feel like home. But they all share one thing in common. They make you forget who you really are. Jung believed that transformation doesn't begin with adding more. It begins with becoming conscious of what's already controlling you. And in today's world, what controls us most isn't always obvious. It's the room we don't question, the app we always open, the role we never stop playing, the silence we mistake for peace. Now, here's the most powerful insight. You don't need to confront all 7 places at once. You only need to make one choice. Leave one space that weakens you and enter one space that strengthens you. Do it just once, for 7 days. If you've been stuck in an echo chamber, follow someone who challenges your views. If you're lost in the comparison arena, take a break from the scroll. If you're wearing a mask, let someone see the real you, just once. If your home is silent in the wrong way, speak one feeling. If your surroundings are chaos, create a 5-minute ritual of stillness. If you've abandoned yourself, say no to one thing that betrays your values. And if there's a forbidden room in your mind, just knock on the door. That's it. And if you do it, not only will you feel a shift, you'll be part of something bigger. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming fully, truly, and consciously yourself. There's a line I want you to remember. Let it echo in your mind as you move forward. Strength is not earned by enduring toxic rooms, but by choosing rooms that help you endure. So here's your invitation. For 7 days, leave one place that drains you and enter one that restores you. And when you do, come back. Share your experience in the comments, because your healing gives others permission to begin theirs. Fate becomes choice the moment you step across a healthier threshold. That's not just psychology, that's power, and it's already in your hands. You just have to choose the right room.